Pardon the shirt, it's very warm today. So I'm going to talk about Godzilla for a bit, because apparently I don't do that often enough. What better way during an international health crisis to soothe your anxiety by marathoning your favourite movie series and ranking them? So that's exactly what I did, and that's exactly what this is. First, a few bullet points. Number 1, I'm only including movies produced in Japan by Toho Studios. I'm not including any of the American movies. Not because I don't think they count as valid entries to the series, but rather they're just a different kind of movie. Hollywood blockbusters and Japanese fantasy have such wildly different approaches to filmmaking that to try and judge them by the same standard is not really fair or productive. Point number 2, where I place the movies on this list is going to be based on a balance of critical analysis and general entertainment value. You see, unlike some people, I go into movies with the active intent of wanting to enjoy them, so balancing the critical analysis and the general fun factor helps me figure out what the best approach is to enjoy a particular movie. So a movie that I think is more fun might appear higher on the list than a movie that is more well made, and vice versa. Also, just because a movie appears relatively low on this list doesn't mean that it's bad or I don't enjoy it. I enjoy the vast majority of these movies. It's entirely relative. This is just my ranking based on how much I enjoy these movies for whatever reason I enjoy them, so don't freak out if it doesn't match yours. Finally, a quick glossary of terms for the uninitiated to pause and have a quick read through. Have you done it? Brilliant. And let's begin. Number 30, Godzilla vs. Gigan. The construction of a peace-themed amusement park comes under scrutiny by a newly hired character artist, who begins to uncover the nefarious truth behind the so-called World Children's Land. This one kind of hurts, because Gigan is actually my favourite villain monster, so it's a real shame that the movie's so bad. The characters are kind of annoying, the pacing's glacial even during the action scenes, the tone's all over the place, and the whole thing comes across as being really cheaply made. Number 29, Godzilla Raids again. When a Japanese fishing company discovers Godzilla fighting a new monster, Anguirus, a plan must quickly be hatched to keep the fights from reaching the mainland. It's kind of interesting to see the kaiju devastation from the perspective of blue-collar workers, but the movie really suffers in its pacing and editing. It's so slow. There are certain scenes that make their point and then grievously outstay their welcome, but ultimately it has a positive message about hope and resilience in the face of calamity. Number 28, Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2. The United Nations Godzilla Countermeasures Center builds Mechagodzilla, a hyper-advanced war machine intended to be the perfect weapon to finally defeat the Monster King. Meanwhile, a baby Godzilla hatches from a giant egg which grabs the attention of his kaiju foster family. This movie's overrated. A lot of people tout this as a highlight of the Heisei era, and I honestly don't see it. It's a tonal mishmash, the story kind of stumbles over itself with the various subplots, and the effects highlight the weakest aspects of the Heisei era effects. Stiff marionettes, sparks instead of pyrotechnics, flat, featureless environments, and that really unconvincing shadow effect. The baby Godzilla scenes are a highlight because there's some genuine emotion behind them, but otherwise this movie's kind of a slog. I'm sorry, I don't get the hype for this one. Number 27, Godzilla vs. Megaguirus. The development of Dimension-Tide technology promises to rid the world of Godzilla via a miniature black hole. But when the weapon is put to the test, it tears open a hole in time and unleashes a deadly prehistoric infestation. A mixed bag of a movie. An alternate history of Japan following Godzilla's initial attack is a great idea for a setting that sadly isn't very deeply explored. And though the film never really feels like it kicks into full gear, it's got some decent horror movie scares and Godzilla himself has some fun characterful moments. It's not strictly bad, but I can't imagine it's anybody's favourite. Number 26, All Monsters Attack. Tormented by school bullies and with his parents always away working, a young boy named Ichiro imagines himself on Monster Island where he befriends the baby Godzilla Minilla and learns some important life lessons. This often gets labelled the worst of the series, largely for its overuse of stock footage in the monster action, which does get a little bit shameless, but honestly I don't think the movie's without merit. It's entirely a children's movie, but it illustrates the escapism that kids crave when their home life is less than ideal. And the characterisation of Minilla's relationship with Godzilla shares some interesting parallels with Ichiro being forced into self-reliance, with his parents always being away working. People really don't give this movie the chance it deserves. It's actually alright. Number 25, the animated Netflix trilogy. Yes, this is 3 movies I hear you screaming from beyond the keyboard. But because they were written and produced at the same time to be 3 parts of one story, I'm including them as a single entry. Also, it's my list, so I can do whatever I want, so shut up. Set 20,000 years in the future, Godzilla has taken over the Earth, and humanity now exists as refugees in kinship with alien races searching for a new home. This trilogy got absolutely lacerated by fans and critics alike, to such an extreme that I think is maybe slightly unfair. Make no mistake, it definitely has its issues. There is so much dialogue, and it's almost entirely technobabble, or that kind of Dark Knight Christopher Nolan dialogue that explains all the subtext in painstaking detail. But that's not saying there aren't some interesting themes to be found here. The ideological struggle between faith and science trying to guide humanity, over-reliance on technology, and some truly eldritch cosmic horror vibes. It's a good premise that's maybe a little clumsily executed, but it makes me want to see more experimentation in the series. I like the idea of exploring unusual settings and heavy esoteric themes. I love the idea of taking well-known Godzilla tropes and doing something completely fresh with them. If only it wasn't so bloody pleased with itself. Number 24, Son of Godzilla. When a giant egg containing a baby Godzilla appears on remote Solgo Island, a research team conducting weather experiments find themselves stranded as their base is destroyed and monster activity explodes. The introduction of the infant kaiju Minla makes this a fairly kid-oriented movie, with the baby Godzilla supplying some carefree kaiju slapstick. We see the characters breaking under the stress of their increasingly hostile situation, and even a new side to Godzilla's character. Turns out he's a bit of an asshole dad, a theme which is mirrored in the backstory of one of the human characters, Seiko. It's a fun little adventure with a bittersweet ending and some frighteningly effective marionette work. Number 23, Godzilla vs. Mothra. An asteroid lands in the ocean, triggering a wave of natural disasters and awakening ancient monsters. Made worse by the environmental damage caused by rampant industrial development, it's up to Mothra to save the day. The characters are played a little more comedically in this movie, for which your mileage may vary. And it also has a very heavy environmental streak running through it. While certainly not the first or last Godzilla movie to have an environmental message, it's certainly the most on the nose. Overall, it's a decent entry, and the monsters themselves have some nice little character arcs. Number 22, Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla. While humanity tries to find a way to bring Godzilla under control, a telekinetic clone mysteriously appears out of a black hole and goes on the warpath trying to take over Earth. Earth's mightiest forces must reluctantly work together with Godzilla to save the Earth. This movie's underrated. It's like the inverse of Mechagodzilla 2. People seem to hate this movie, but I really enjoy it. It doesn't take itself too seriously, it abandons the other Heisei movie's darker tone for a more colourful, strident disregard for decorum, and not wasting any time getting stuck into the action. There's not much in terms of heavy thematics or weighty characters, but Space Godzilla himself is a fantastic villain. He's such a bastard. Number 21, Godzilla 2000. A team of kaiju storm chasers are attempting to uncover the mysteries of Godzilla's biology in an attempt to understand him better. But the discovery of an ancient UFO puts the pressure on, as Tokyo is set to become a fiery battlefield. This was the first Godzilla movie made after the notorious 1998 TriStar remake, and it was kind of Toho's way of saying, "No! Bad TriStar! Look at the mess you made!" For the most part, it's fairly standard kaiju fare, but at the time, that's sort of what the series needed, and it represents a major step up in the quality of special effects, with some really impressive cinematography, lighting, and shot composites. Number 20, Ebera, Horror of the Deep. The search for a missing sailor takes an unlikely group of misfits to a remote island where they discover a rogue terrorist nation and their gigantic crustacean watchdog. One of the more light-hearted Godzilla movies, there's no large-scale city destruction or world-ending super monster. It's kind of a heist/escape movie where the heroes have to work together using their skills to beat the villains and free their slaves, with the giant monster action acting as a kind of action disaster backdrop to the main story. It's actually a really nice, easygoing, feel-good movie, and it deserves extra credit for featuring some absolutely seamless shot compositing. Number 19, Destroy All Monsters. In the futuristic world of 1999, the world's monsters have been gathered on Monster Island for research and study when they inexplicably escape and begin attacking cities around the world. The race is on to counter the cause of this global catastrophe. This is a movie of two halves. The first half being fast-paced race against time investigations and classic kaiju destruction. The second half being slower planning and execution of large-scale operations. But it all comes to a head with what this movie is known for, which is the climax, one of the single greatest monster fights ever caught on film. The movie's quick to draw you in, and with a little bit of patience, you'll be suitably rewarded. Number 18, Godzilla Final Wars. To celebrate Godzilla's 50th anniversary, Toho released this absolute madhouse of a movie in which giant monsters and alien invaders attack everywhere in the world. This movie is absolutely mental. There's little to nothing in the way of subtext or complex characters, but it does feature every single action movie trope ever conceived, blended together into a super stylized sugar rush with a hyperactive electropunk soundtrack and not an ounce of shame or subtlety in sight. It's a perfect party movie to watch with your friends over pizza and drinks. I mean, it's Godzilla's birthday, why wouldn't you throw a party? Number 17, Godzilla vs. Destroyer. Godzilla has come down with a severe case of being on fire, posing a very real threat of ending life on Earth. If that wasn't bad enough, the chemical legacy of Godzilla's oldest foe has returned in new and nightmarish forms. At the time, this was penned as being the final Godzilla movie in order to make way for, that. As such, the movie carries itself with a sense of grand reverence and finality, with a lot of visual and thematic callbacks to the original movie. It also wins the award of being the single biggest tearjerker in the series, so make sure you have some tissues handy. Number 16, Godzilla vs. Biollante. Scientists have begun decoding the secrets of Godzilla's DNA, including rapid healing and radiosynthesis. This revolutionary biotech becomes a target for international terrorists, corporate mercenaries, and a bereaved scientist hoping to keep his daughter's spirit alive. The ethics of genetic engineering were becoming a hot-button issue in the 80s, and this movie tackles not only the practical implications of splicing DNA into new and unusual combinations, but the lengths that governments and corporations will go to in order to seize control of groundbreaking innovations. And for the most part, the effects are really solid as well, with Biollante herself being one of the series' largest and most elaborate pieces. Okay, we're halfway there. Jesus, it's warm. Oh, still with me? Give us a thumbs up if you're still with me. Number 15, Godzilla vs. Megalon. An undersea civilization is ravaged by nuclear weapons test, so they unleash their guardian god Megalon to take revenge on the surface world. While this is one of the cheaper, cheesier Godzilla movies, it also has the distinction of being the first I ever saw. As a result, I kinda have a hard time being critical about it because it brings me pure, uncomplicated joy. It's a very simple, very accessible, very colourful adventure with a catchy theme tune and some fun crash boom wallop style action. It also features Godzilla's single greatest power move, of which those who have seen the movie know exactly what I'm talking about. Number 14, King Kong vs. Godzilla. The battle of the century, so nice they're making it twice. A PR campaign looking for a new mascot travels to a remote island in search of a legendary spirit. But the rise of Godzilla sets their plans ablaze and King Kong must be redirected to save Japan. This one's a straight-up comedy, with eccentric characters acting as a light-hearted satire of PR spin and commercialism, as well as action so outlandish it could only come from the realism be damned world of tokusatsu. Thoroughly entertaining and wholly worthy of a big-budget retelling. Number 13, Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah. People from the future arrive in a UFO warning of Japan's imminent demise at the claws of Godzilla. They offer a solution that could see the monster erased from history, but messing with cause and effect so rarely goes well, and Japan falls victim to the three-headed King Ghidorah. So, it's a time travel movie, which of course means the story is incredibly convoluted. But if you can forgive the cavernous causality loops, it's a really fun time-hopping adventure with lots of exciting action and some nice character moments. Number 11 and 12, Godzilla against Mechagodzilla and Godzilla Tokyo SOS. I'm putting these two together because they're very similar to one another, and I also think they benefit from being viewed as a double feature, with Tokyo SOS being the direct sequel. After a series of calamitous monster attacks, the Japanese government decides to build an anti-kaiju robot around the bones of the original Godzilla, and it's up to a disgraced former pilot to guide Mechagodzilla, aka Kiryu, to victory. Later, Mothra's twin priestesses warned that it was wrong to defile the bones of the elder Godzilla and that they must be laid to rest in the ocean to avoid further disaster. Both of these movies feature really engaging lead characters surrounded by a strong supporting cast. Impressive monster action propped up by beautiful cinematography. Fairly similar structure between these two movies, with the first half being character exploration and the second half one really big fight. Great music and effects, and some really interesting things to say about artificial intelligence and the value of life and death. Both independently really good, and only made better when viewed as companion pieces. Okay, we're in the home stretch. Can you see me glistening? Number 10, Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. An archaeological discovery unveils an ancient prophecy foretelling the end of the world and how to prevent it. With the arrival of the cosmic war machine Mechagodzilla, our heroes must fulfill the prophecy and save the world from catastrophe. This is a very tightly packed movie that's part detective story, part alien invasion, part supernatural mysticism, multiple genres blended together into a pleasingly compelling adventure with a charismatic villain and some of the most high-energy monster fights in the series. Also, there's a lot of pyrotechnics. Like, really a lot. Number 9, Invasion of Astromonster. The first manned mission to Planet X reveals an alien civilization under siege, and a deal is written up that could see both races prosper. But maybe there's more to this deal than meets the eye. Though there's actually very little monster action in this, it never feels lacking at all. There's a lot of espionage and double-crossing with a cast of really dynamic characters, with a mixture of American and Japanese heroes contrasting the uniform autocracy of the alien invaders. Possibly a metaphor for the threat of communist China, who at the time had just entered the nuclear arms race. And when, as is tradition, the time comes for the kaiju to start tearing through some buildings, it is magnifique. Astromonster is also the movie that gave us this happy moment, for which we should all be grateful. Number 8. Shin Godzilla. A clean slate reboot, Godzilla emerges from Tokyo Bay causing wanton destruction and widespread confusion, this time appearing as an ever-mutating mass of bones, blood and malice. The government scrambles to understand this unprecedented threat and find ways to defeat it. Winner of the Japanese Film Academy's Best Picture Award, Shin Godzilla is a demonstration of how bureaucracy and career politics get in the way of disaster relief, specifically reflecting the events of the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and subsequent nuclear disaster at Fukushima. The stylised presentation and editing, the high-stakes procedural drama, and the precision cinematography makes Shin Godzilla feel like a singular artistic vision with a purpose. It also breaks the mold by using an entirely CGI Godzilla instead of a stunt actor in a suit, which would be a shame if the visuals weren't utterly jaw-dropping. And the fact that Shin Godzilla's message about international cooperation during a time of crisis has only become more relevant with the current state of the world is also pretty impressive. Number 7. The Return of Godzilla. The first entry in the Heisei reboot series, Godzilla appears after a 30-year absence. The Japanese government tries to keep his appearance a secret to prevent widespread panic, but when he destroys a Soviet submarine, international Cold War tensions threaten to throw the world into nuclear chaos. I love the style of this movie. It's got that distinctive 80s fantasy vibe that really scratches an itch for me. And it's a slow burn kind of a movie, which I appreciate. The action's surprisingly restrained and tasteful, and there's a lot of heavy political debate about Cold War escalation and the ethics of nuclear weapons. At the time this movie was made, the United States and Soviet Union were ready to blow each other sky high, and Japan was caught in the middle, so it's no wonder such a prevalent fear made its way into a kaiju film. That's what they're for, after all. Number 6. The Terror of Mechagodzilla. An experimental submarine is mysteriously destroyed, so an investigation sets out to find the cause. They end up uncovering a deep-rooted scheme for global conquest by a mad scientist and his alien collaborators. The final entry in the Showa continuity. On paper, the premise of this movie seems like a fairly standard pulp sci-fi setup, but the direction turns the dial just enough to make this a little more poignant than previous entries. Betrayal, conspiracy and tragedy make for compelling villains and invested heroes, which gives the impressive kaiju action and city destruction a real sense of purpose. It's an excellent way to close out the first generation of the series. Number 5. Godzilla vs. Hedera. Feeding and growing on a steady diet of pollution, the living alien slime Hedera begins threatening life on Earth with its ever-expanding toxic body. It's up to the combined efforts of science and the tall green angry one to save the world from choking to extinction. Not surprised then, this movie deals with the subject of pollution, which at the time had become a national crisis in Japan, and it does so very potently. The trippy visuals and acid-based body horror certainly leave an impression, while the creepy atmosphere and music help escalate the tension with the ever-evolving threat of the smog monster. Easily one of the Godzilla series' most provocative and disturbing entries. Number 4. Mothra vs. Godzilla. A typhoon washes a giant egg onto the Japanese shoreline, and it is quickly snapped up by a wealthy business entrepreneur and turned into a tourist attraction. Inevitably, things go wrong. This is regarded by a lot of people to be one of the best of the series, and it's easy to see why. The plight of Mothra and her island home build high emotional stakes, and also stand in as a criticism of corporate capitalism, its greed, its influence, and the negative impact of its actions. Once again, an example of a movie's subtext growing more relevant with age. There's some seriously impressive effects work on display here as well, not just with the monsters, but oversized macro sets to accommodate Mothra's tiny priestesses. It's a concise, complete package kind of a movie, with some really satisfying setup and payoff and genuine emotional gravity. Number 3. Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. What begins with the attempted assassination of a Himalayan princess builds into the inaugural appearance of Godzilla's arch-nemesis, King Ghidorah. Oh man, I love this movie. It's so much fun, and it's got everything I love about kaiju movies. Chaotic monster combat and epic city destruction, world-ending threats balanced by outlandish merriment, ancient prophecies and nefarious schemes, the blending of hard sci-fi and mystical fantasy, all delivered in complete earnest with craft and passion and sincerity. Since getting the Blu-ray box set, this is probably the one I've rewatched the most. I literally never get tired of it. Number 2. Godzilla, Mothra and King Ghidorah giant monsters all-out attack. Yeah, let's just call it GMK. An ambitious news reporter is investigating legends about ancient guardian monsters which seem to be getting deliberately woken up. Turns out they might just be Japan's only hope against the rising threat of Godzilla. Another fresh take on the character, this time taking on a much more malevolent and supernatural vibe. In this movie, Godzilla is the reincarnation of the victims of Japanese war crimes, whose spirits are angry that Japan has swept their transgressions under the rug and forgotten about them. When you consider how much the Godzilla series is kind of founded on the idea of Japan being the victims of World War II, this is an incredibly bold statement, and it's an important message about being able to acknowledge and reflect on the darker aspects of your nation's history. Something which, personally, I think a few countries should really get on board with right now. Those who do not learn from history, as they say. GMK's powerful subject matter is a framework from which hangs great characters and performances, a unique soundtrack, and some genuinely stunning action and effect sequences. I'd expect nothing less from the director of the Gamera trilogy. And finally, we come to number 1, my pick for best/favourite Godzilla movie. Coming as a surprise to absolutely no one, it's the original. Yeah, I know, such a predictable answer, but I'm not apologising for it, it's just stunning. A prehistoric sea monster rises from the Pacific after being disturbed by a hydrogen bomb test. It destroys boats and planes before going on the rampage in Tokyo. Now, of course, atomic monsters running wild wasn't a new thing in 1950s cinema. There was a whole bunch of them. But the thing that made Godzilla different was that for the people that made the movie, the effects of nuclear weapons were a very real, very recent, and very painful memory. The movie's high contrast, almost film noir visual style, combined with the subtle creeping soundtrack, give it a tangible atmosphere of dread and suspense. The characters and performances are refined and impassioned. The groundbreaking use of miniatures, camera trickery, and suit actors pioneered the Japanese filmmaking tradition of tokusatsu, which is still going strong to this day. But above this, the original Godzilla, possibly more than any other monster movie, authentically reflects on the impact of nuclear weapons. Not just the immediate devastation, but the anxiety that they sow and the weight of responsibility that comes with using them. It's a perfectly paced portrait of the social and political climate of a nation that has spent the best part of a decade living in fear. It's not just a good movie, it's an important one. And there you have it. Thank you so much for watching, and well done if you managed to make it to the end of this. Why not make your own list and put it in the comments section? Why not argue at length about my rankings? Oh, you don't need me to tell you that, I'm sure you already are. Do take care of yourselves, and I'll catch you all later.